It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show. It's a Wednesday morning and it's so good to be in your company. We're talking about a subject that I'm particularly invested in, property, no pun intended there. But amidst the many processes involved when a loved one passes away, the handling of an estate can prove to be quite a tricky one, especially if you don't know all the steps involved. And so joining us again to share more on her expertise on conveyancing is director and partner at STBB legal firm, Refqah Ho-Yee. Always such a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome back.
Thanks so much, guys.
The first question that I'm going to ask is, because now we're talking about what happens to your property after you have passed on.
Yes.
If I own a property in this life and I happen to die, what happens? What are the processes that are involved, you know, especially when it comes to the administrative part of it?
Thanks. So, you know, there's so many costs involved and clients aren't aware of that. And while I appreciate people who actually make the time to draw up wills, you know, they spend so much time thinking about which asset I'm going to leave to which heir and beneficiary. They don't necessarily know of or think about the costs involved to actually implement the terms of their will or to transfer those assets to heirs. And so, in this country, if you have an estate worth more than 250,000 Rand, your estate is reported to the Master of the High Court and an executor gets appointed, and there's quite a long administrative process that takes place. And so your executor's fee is up to 3.5% of the gross asset value of your estate. The Master itself supervises every step of the administrative process. So the Master's fee is 600 Rand to 7,000 Rand, depending on the value of the estate. If you've got assets, those assets need to be transferred out of your estate into the name of your heir. So, for example, your property has to be transferred into the name of your heir. There are transfer costs there, even though an inheritance transfer doesn't attract the transfer duty tax payable to SARS. If you've got a bond on your property, that bond has to be cancelled. So there's a cancellation fee, and that's about 4,000 Rand just for one bond to cancel. You could co-own a property with someone, so your spouse, for example, you're married in community of property and you co-own your property, so even just that half-share transfer, that endorsement to your surviving spouse costs. Transfer costs, you have to get a rates clearance certificate. One of the biggest expenses people don't think about is that when you die, your debts survive. So nothing just magically disappears. And so, of course, all your expenses need to be paid for. You've got store cards, you've got credit card, you've got that debt. So where's the cash in your estate to cover those expenses? You'd pass away and your tax still needs to be finalized. Your income tax submission needs to be done. Do you have outstanding taxes? Do you have a small business that needs to be wound up? Do you have staff that need to be paid out, or, you know, whatever their contracts are? So there's so many different costs involved. And while I appreciate that people take the time to think about which assets they're leaving to which heirs, think about the cash. And do you have sufficient cash in your estate to actually cover all those expenses?
Yeah. And that's such an important thing, because cash flow is what ends up almost being the tripping block for so many people, because you might have it an asset value, but to liquidate those assets takes an extraordinarily long time, and creditors sometimes are impatient and so on, and that could result in legal costs, for instance, where your estate is being sued and there are costs involved in that.
Completely.
So with that said, would you then recommend or suggest that somebody maybe have funds put aside for these unexpected costs, maybe open a separate account into which you deposit money in anticipation for, you know, 30, 40 years down the line? Is that something that's prudent?
Definitely. And when I sit across from clients and we're busy with their estate planning, I say, don't even think that far ahead. Think about next week. So this year has taught us anything. There's also expect the unexpected.
Yeah.
But I really do tell clients, when you're thinking about your assets and the heirs and what you want to leave to someone, and think practically, just think about next week. If you pass away next week, what do you have? What debt are you leaving, and what are you leaving for your heirs to clean up and sort out when you've passed away? So I think look at your assets, look at your current liabilities, and even that growth, thinking, okay, I've got a bond. Do I have life insurance cover? speak to a professional, you know, shop around and get good rates. I mean, depending on your finances and your circumstances, you can certainly set aside 100, 200 Rand a month and take out a really good life insurance policy. Set aside RAs, retirement annuities, all sorts of policies and investments that you can certainly set aside and think about. Have a look at your policy schedule if you are someone that's got numerous investments, and look at them and actually see, are they going to beneficiaries and not to my estate? Because remember, if your policies and your investments get paid out to beneficiaries, they're not going into your estate where the money is needed to administer the estate. So certainly have a policy or fund set aside that will pay into the estate so that the executor is armed and has access to cash to actually administer the estate. Because imagine you leave a life insurance policy and your beneficiary gets that money. How am I going to get that money as your executor out of that beneficiary to cover the costs involved to administer the estate? So I think certainly look at your assets and look at your expenses and see what your liabilities are, and do you have sufficient cover to settle all of those. And it's never too early to start. So certainly, even if you don't have those assets yet, as soon as you start earning a salary, start putting aside a bit of money and take out a life insurance policy, because, you know, you'll think, oh my gosh, I should have done this 5 years ago or 2 years ago. Definitely.
I was actually that was my next question. How early or when is the best time to start? So as soon as you make a salary, that's the perfect time to start putting aside money for life insurance or any, you know, life thing or admin.
Luckily, Refqah is not going too far away. She will be back with us a little bit later on to guide us on what first-time property buyers should be considering before confirming that sale. We know it's very, very exciting, but there are a couple of things to consider. She's also going to be answering your burning questions regarding buying or selling property during this time. So if you have any questions, do post them onto our Facebook page, and we will then answer them as quickly as we can on our Facebook Live session after the show as well.